this computer. All right, we are recording. All right, welcome, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Agile Spain webinar series. My name is Fede. I'm working as a product manager at Nexting. Thank you also, Nexting, for giving me the opportunity to do these kind of things as well. So today we have a very special guest where we are going to talk about a topic that I wish I could have talked about this in the past, but we have the opportunity today. So our guest is Lex Roman. Lex, thank you so much for being with us. If you want to introduce yourself to the audience, that would be great.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lex Roman. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I identify as a growth designer. So I've sort of built my career around helping companies grow through the lens of design. I've worked with all kinds of companies, startups, enterprises, but I've really found my sweet spot with growth stage companies that have hit product market fit, but want to scale to the next level. I will say that, so as part of that practice, what's relevant for this meetup is that I have developed a lot of data skills, mostly on the self-serve analytics side, but even just in the process side, how do you define metrics? How do you get alignment around that stuff? I am sort of moving now, as Fede and I were talking about just before everyone joined, more into the social justice space, which is something I've been doing in my spare time for a while, but I'm now actually, getting paid to do more of that work too. So I'm at sort of a transition point in my career, and we can talk about that because data, for society is maybe a little bit different than data for private company growth, but yeah.
Great. Nice. So a little bit of housekeeping before we start. So we have divided the session in 3 different areas, more, topics about general stuff. Then it's focused specifically on product. Then also we can jump into social as you mentioned, Lex. And then the last one is specifically about growth. So we try to combine questions from all of these 3 areas. If people, wants to send a question to Lex, just put it on the chat board. I'll try to do my best to collect it and interrupt as less as possible. But yeah, so let's get into the topic, Lex. So why should we care about data, Lex? Why is important data? I mean, even, regardless of the position that you are in your organization, why a person when joins a company or starts a company should care about data?
I mean, I think you should care about data because you act on the data that you have, right? You act on the information that you have. And when you don't have data, you act on assumptions, which we know are intensely problematic, right? Everybody sort of assumes how something should go or that their experience is everyone else's experience. And then you design the wrong product and your company fails. So to me, data is about, what do you want to take action on? You need to measure what you want to be able to take action on.
Got it. So the problem that I normally see is like, some people say, well, they like to pay lip service saying that data is like the new soul, is the new digital asset of the 21st century and this kind of stuff. But then when you see, for example, what they're doing, that is not happening. It's not reflected on what they're saying. Why would you say there are the main, I would say, root causes, at least on your experience, that people, are praying this kind of thing, but then in reality, they're not, actioning on those?
Yeah. All the time. I see that all the time. So I quit my full-time job in the fall of, what year is it? I think the fall of 2019. I think last year I quit my full-time job to start my own company. But before that, I've done a lot of consulting work. And so I've worked with a lot of companies. I've only been doing UX design for 8 years, but I've probably worked with, over 100 companies at this point. So I see that all the time where companies are like, or organizations of any kind are just like, well, we really believe in data, right? We're super data driven. We're really into data, and we make all these data driven decisions, and everything is measured and blah, 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 right? And you see that in the news about companies. You see that in the news about tech companies. But then you go into these companies and you're just like, wow, that is like not at all what's happening here. Like data is being measured, but it's being sent to a place where no one can find it, where no one can understand it, or very few people can understand it. Those people are not often connected to the product team. I talk with so many product managers who can't access the data, can't understand it. They have to go through a data scientist. That data scientist is super busy. They can't get the information that they need. So yeah, I see that all the time. I think what's happening there is a couple things. One thing is like working with people is super hard. Like the larger your company is, the harder it's going to be to get anything done, including data, but not just data. So just like company collaboration is tough. I think with data specifically, it's the technical expertise, and it's something that non-technical folks have to be able to engage with, but no one invests in ramping people onto the technical skills that they need. And so like for me in design, designers are not trained on data typically, which is okay. They're designers, their craft is different than that. But if a company doesn't invest in teaching a designer how to use the tools or how the process goes, or if they have a question about product usage, how they should go about answering that, then that designer is not going to use data to do their job. Right. And then that designer is going to design something that's ill-informed, and then it's going to tank, and then no one's going to know because they can't find the data. And so, yeah, I hear that all the time. I gave a talk, which you may have seen, or at least seen that this talk exists, called The UX of Data, about this exact thing. It's just about how data practice is broken on so many teams.
So could you say more or less, or talk about the principles that when you, for example, start working with a client and you see, for example, this kind of, say, anti-patterns or behaviors that are spread across different organizations where data is not being managed or accessed by the people that they should be accessing the data. Could you share more or less, kind of principles where you are trying to teach them or rely your work on to start getting in a different way, rather than, having someone there in the corner that is not, should use data to make decisions, but it's not, either because it's technically complicated or, whatever reason?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I try to recognize that like, this is really challenging, and I try to cut everybody some slack. And so the first thing that I do is just try to get the lay of the land. Like, who's interested in working with data and not getting the help that they need? Who is working with data and seems fine? How are data decisions being made in terms of what's being tracked, what tools are getting used, how that information is being shared? How much are executives involved in that? How much are executive level metrics, like the stuff they report to their boards, connected to product level metrics? So I sort of poke around all that stuff. Data quality, I'm looking at what tools they have, what the data looks like in those tools, talking with people about their challenges. And from there you start, and that's like, I mean, it depends on the company and the size of the company and the size of their data, but that takes a while to really get a grip on. And you've got to be careful with that stuff, because you don't want to go into an organization and be like, well, I'm going to fix all this stuff, because it's truly just really hard. So first, you got to get the lay of the land on all that stuff. The next thing would be to focus on the defining metrics. So making sure that executive team metrics, right, what the CEO reports to the board, is the same metrics that are being shared internally, the product team is keying off of. Making sure those conversations are happening, and sort of like gently asking why they're not happening, because they're very often not happening. And it depends on the company size. I recognize that, like, if you work at Facebook, like, you're probably not, if you were like I would never recommend anyone work at Facebook. Let me give you another example. What's a good company that's like pretty big that everyone knows? I guess. What?
Netflix, or someone
Sure,
who has
Netflix.
A very data-driven culture.
So Netflix is a good example. So if you work at Netflix, if you're like an individual contributor, product manager, engineer, you're probably not going to be like driving alignment with the CEO necessarily. But like, I would take that up as far as you can to your head of product, your head of engineering, whoever you can have a relationship with, along with all of your teammates, and just say like, hey, it kind of seems like we're defining this way, but like, are we sure that this is how this person and that person is also defining it? Is the marketing team working off that same definition? And so you want to know, do people define the metric the same way? Is it the same point in the product? Are they measuring it the same way? Are they looking at it in the same place? I think that's really important. It sort of depends on the team. You at least need to be working off the same exact database. But like, I think it's just important if like everyone's literally sharing the same report, but not always possible at a large company. So the definitions, are we defining the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing? When I say someone signed up, does that mean the same thing to you? And then you want to look at the tooling and the data quality. You know, are there big red flags in the data quality? Are you sending in people's personal information? Are you sending in a bunch of noise and garbage? You know, how readable is the data? Then after that, I would focus on the team's understanding and accessibility. How much do people feel that they can participate? How much value are people getting from the data, especially people that are not on the data team? And it's like, that's like a long process. I mean, that's like you're going to do that the whole time you're at a company, right? Like that's just like an evolving process. And it truly, it just never ends because you have new metrics you define, someone brings in a new tool, like it always just becomes more complex. But it's a good thing. I mean, the thing that we want to do, and the point, when I did the UX of data talk, which you can find on my website, I have like a blog post and some of the tools up. I think it's lexroman.com/UX of data. The place I think we just want everyone to get to is where the awareness that data is hard and involves collaboration, everyone needs to have that. And we're not there yet. Like you said, a lot of companies act really data driven and then they're not, but there's definitely people that are, you go in and they're like, well, no, everything's fine. And it's like, well, it's fine to you, but like, it's not really having the result it needs to have. You guys aren't delivering the product you want to deliver because the designers, engineers, and product managers aren't getting the data that they need. So just because the data scientist feels good about their report, like that doesn't mean anything. So I think as an industry, we'll have transformed when we have, you know, broad awareness that data is hard and you need to collaborate around it.
Right. But let's suppose, for example, that I'm completely literate about data. I don't know anything about data. You said that, you know, it's also challenging because normally involves different, at some point maybe different technical skills. At some extent, you need to do some kind of queries or whatever thing, depending on the tool that you're using, could be, you know, easier, more difficult. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about Google Analytics because I know that you have some sort of
I hate Google. Is anyone here using Google? I'm sorry.
No, we, you know, at least at Nexus we don't. We are trying to, you know, elevate the level of analytics that we're doing right now. But let's suppose that I'm a starter. Have no idea, you know, what would be the first. And I'm also a product manager, so supposedly I will have to look at the data. At least be self-sufficient with the information that I need to look at to try to make decisions for the product that we are building. So what would be 2 or 3 advices to try to say, hey, these 2 or 3 advices more or less would give you, you know, get the ball rolling, and then of course you can, you know, go further. But what are the 2 or 3 things that you recommend people who have no idea about that on how to start?
Yeah. So the first thing would be to not be afraid to ask. I think that a lot of people are like, I'm not like, does it look like I don't know how to do my job? And it's like, no, you need to ask. Like no one knows what they're doing. And so, you know, as a PM, if you're starting with an organization, ask, you know, all the things we just talked about. Ask who's defining metrics, ask where that's, you know, ask the sort of process stuff first. You know, how are we going about defining metrics? Where can I find that information? You know, when we're doing a release, who's defining what gets tracked? Like, how do I go about doing that stuff? Ask about tools. I would also say if a tool is new to you, if a process is new to you, like if you're going from a company that does mostly self-serve analytics like Google Analytics to a company that mostly requires PMs to do SQL queries, be upfront about that and ask about that. Say, is there any support? I'm learning SQL for the first time, or I'm learning this tool for the first time. You know, could I get some budget for a class? Is there someone here who could help me learn? Like, people, I have found that when you ask that stuff, people are generally like, yeah, let's do like a SQL study group.
Right.
There are a lot of great resources for that stuff online that are free too. But I would just say, don't feel like you have to like ramp up everything and like come in fully ready. Like you should lean on your teammates and just be honest about this stuff. I need this information. I'm going to work on being able to pull my own SQL queries. But until that point, here's how here's how you could help us make sure we're executing at the level we need to execute at. Like, ask for tool walkthroughs, ask for clarification. I've gotten a lot of pushback from data teams in the past. Not all of them. Some of them are great, but with that exact thing, just like, oh, okay, like here's, access to mode, like good luck with your queries. And it's like, nah, it's not going to cut it. Like, it's just not. So ask for the support and just be like, hey, I'm not a data scientist. I'm a product manager. And like, my goal is to really ultimately ship successful products for this company. I need your support so that I can do that in a data informed way. And if your executive team is aligned on using data, then they'll be supportive of that. And if they're not, then maybe you should leave.
Yeah, completely.
But I think don't be afraid to ask. I tell designers this all the time because designers are like, oh, I don't really understand, math or charts. And it's like, well, ask someone on your team who does.
Yeah, got it. So what let me try to go to the other side of the of the spectrum. So what are the key, let's say, traits that you, for example, see in teams that are very advanced, with the use of data? What are the key traits that you say, hey, this team is very, they got it, they know how to do that? What are the key traits or features that you see, for example, in those teams to say, wow, that's, I don't want to say some, to copy, but like a good thing that all the people could have more like a standardized way of working. But what are 2 or 3 things that you see on those teams?
I don't know, truthfully, that I've ever worked with a team that I thought was like exceptional at data. Like, and partially that's because, as I mentioned in my introduction, I choose to work with companies that are at a growth stage, and often those companies didn't really have a data practice as a startup and are now trying to catch up to their growth. And someone did that hastily, and it's like kind of a mess by the time I get there. And then in enterprise, it's a mess for a whole other reason, right? There's like way too many folks in the thing there. So I don't know that I've ever worked with a company, as you mentioned, Netflix has a good reputation for that, but I didn't work at Netflix. My sense from Chaitanya Deora, who was a director of design, I think that was her title at Netflix, and is one of the organizers of our growth designers community. My sense from her is that it was just part of the culture. They're hiring and making sure that people are supported in their data practice, no matter what role they take. And I think that sounds like a really positive first step. I think awareness from everyone in the company that this is a challenging thing that needs to be worked on, that it's not just like a given, like we plugged in a tool and data is there. Mm-hmm. Having executives that are using data is a good sign. Having them, be aware that it's challenging, having them check in with the team and ask how they can support, that's a good sign, rather than an executive that's kind of like, well, aren't we measuring that? Like, just kind of asking these questions like, well, isn't it so easy? Like, just pull the report. It's like, well, it's not that easy. We have to like define it. It's not in the tool. It's actually super noisy. Have you never looked at this report? Like, what do you?
Yeah.
So those things, I think the alignment between the executive level and all of the delivery teams. I mean, that actually, I've worked at companies that were not just delivering tech products. And so that includes, the warehouse, if you're doing fulfillment, customer support, like all teams. Are there metrics aligned to what the goal of the company is? Those are good signs. And then I think, when you ask, I need help with something, is there support for that in the company? Does your manager back you up on that? Can you get education budget? Are your teammates open to that? Like, that's a good sign, rather than like sink or swim, good luck. Like, yeah.
Got it. So there's a lot of understanding between, that it is difficult alignment between the things that you're measuring and the things that your executive are basically targeting as well. And then I was thinking, as you were saying, that if, for me, for example, as a product manager, it's very difficult to try to keep the data. Maybe there is a sign or a signal that the way that we're instrumenting all the events and this kind of stuff is very difficult. We need something easier, right? So that could be another indicator that we need to, the way that we're instrumenting our analytics process, whatever thing that we have in place, is difficult, and we need to revamp it or change it or modify it or whatever.
Yeah, what's going on there? You're like, the instrumentation process is just like cumbersome and painful.
No, no. You know, at least in our company, what we're doing is like we realize that we need some kind of we have used you know we have some kind of analytics process that we put ourselves kind of telemetry thing, and then what we did is like realize that in order to move further, go to try to elevate the analytics process that we're doing, we needed something different. So we have Pendo now. So hopefully we will be able to get a better understanding of what our customer, the behavior of our customer is, and tracking all the things that with the system that we had that we built ourselves, we were not able to. So hopefully we'll have to those things to support our hypothesis on validation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think as product makers, we all are starting, some of us have already shifted to this, but the industry is starting to shift to this idea of like, oh, we don't just like put stuff out and hope it does well. We learn, we iterate, right? Same thing with your data process, right? So it's good to be checking in with your team. Is this working? What's not working? Should we switch tools? Should we just change something about our process?
Right.
I think that's good.
Let me try to, now that you brought that topic, I would like to ask you a question. So I know that there can be different kind of team, product can be different, but you know, and I know this is going to be very very generic question, but maybe we can refine it or iterate it. What should a team measure? I mean, if you have to get one team in general, what should they measure? I mean, you can have different depending on the product, but general thing, as you want to say, be careful with this kind of stuff because that is not going to give you what you want, or that might be a vanity metric, or try to focus more on these kind of things. I don't know, maybe behaviors or different kind of stuff, and then someone could ask, how do I measure behaviors, right? But what is your recommendation when you go to a team and you see, for example, what they're measuring, how they're instrumenting all their events? How do you try to get them more into impact rather than, oh yeah, we have three customers who visited the page. Oh, fantastic! What does it mean, right?
Yeah.
So high level, more or less, and then we can go a little bit on the details. But what are the things that you recommend the teams to measure?
Yeah. All the time, people are just like, well, we have so much data, right? A lot of data points everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, the most important thing to measure is your business model. How does your business succeed? Like, what are the metrics that would indicate your business is going to succeed in its mission? It might not be money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It might be something else, but those are the most important things to get right? Because you want to absolutely know whether or not your business is succeeding or failing or on the path to one of those things. And so that's the most important thing. So you would obviously always instrument your point of purchase or your point of subscription or whatever that metric is for your company. Number of things watched in terms of like advertising or views on ads or whatever those metrics are that would indicate your company is successful. And then you always want to back those out into the contributing factors that indicate someone is on the path to that success event or event. It could be a set of events. In the case of, a multi-sided product. So, did they sign up? Did they, interact with a key component of your journey? Like you sort of want some touch points, almost like if you're taking a road trip, like little rest stops along the way. Like what are those? And it's hard to speak to that without thinking about a product specifically, but you'll know, right? You'll think about your business model and you'll say, okay, well, I'm YouTube and I want people to upgrade into a paid YouTube subscription. So what would indicate that they're on the path to doing that? Well, one thing would be that they've watched a video. I'm going to instrument plays on the video. And I like to do this in little, by visualizing the user journey. I'm a designer, so I lay out the mocks or I draw the user journey, and then I'll be like, what do I want to know about this moment and that moment? I like to caution people, and not everyone, like a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I really prefer to start small, to just like, if you're instrumenting your product for the first time, be lightweight with that stuff. Like just hit those key goalposts and don't overdo it, because I've just seen so many companies with just crazy noisy data, to your point, Fede, about like, well, we have page views, we have this, we have that. And it's like, wow, but no one cares. Like, what are we going to do with it? Right. So the question I always ask is, if we knew this information, what would we do with it? How would we act on it? And if the answer is we're not going to do anything, then don't track that. Like,
yeah. There are two things that I like to highlight based on what you just said. I mean, the first one is like, you mentioned, for example, that you as a designer, you like to, for example, lay the whole, customer journey to try to understand the key, customer, key points where you should measure. That means that if you don't have if you don't have a designer, just bring someone who understands the whole customer journey for your customer, right? Because that is going to give you the whole, end-to-end perspective. So you need to collaborate with your designer to understand if you don't know what the journey is, right? So first thing. And the second thing is, I think that on the call is Matthew. Matthew, I'm working, he's the product intelligence person from our company. I have a lot of discussion with him where we were trying to see, for example, the same thing that you were saying. See, for example, where the key points we need to measure. I remember that we came up with a definition where we wanted to something like sort of like a North Star to try to say where our key insights that the people that we wanted to measure. But that was a very interesting conversation, even though we have a lot of back and forth. But I think it's also very nice conversations to have, because that will give you a lot of insights, how you should instrument your product based on the events. What are the key important things that you need to put on there? And of course, again, what is the North Star? What is the product, our product should do for the customer? And then also try to find, of course, like a measurement for that. I mean, very interesting conversation for that to have also. I don't know if you have something to add on that.
Well, a couple of things. When I say the user journey, totally, I think you should collaborate with designers. I don't necessarily mean the entire thing of your whole product. I just mean like within. Yeah. So like, let's say you're planning a release, what's involved in that release or that experiment. Just lay out the like 5 mocks or whatever and be like, what should we look at here? So like micro little loops, in your product. Not necessarily, I don't want to like make that overblown. It shouldn't be like a whole big thing of gathering all this. Like, no. What are you shipping? Lay the thing out you're shipping. Take a look at it. See if you're measuring the stuff you need to measure before you hit your release. I was going to say something else about your second point, but I lost it. I think it's important. It's been important, but it's a thing that we tend to ignore in tech. It's really important that you think about the human impact of your metrics. And this is just a general product strategy thing, right? It's not just data, but if you measure this thing, you're going to try to game that thing. And so does that benefit your users? Is that behavior something that's mutually beneficial for your customers or your users and the business? Or is it just beneficial for the business? And that is, I think, a really important conversation to have. It's just like, the human side of the data. I think we very often forget that. And so you want to make sure, like, yes, if people, if they complete a class on Coursera, then it's good for Coursera and it's good for the student, right? So that's like a great mutually beneficial metric. I think that's really important. And it's one of the reasons why I push back against engagement as a metric, not only because it's like incredibly vague, but also because engagement is not anyone's goal other than your business. Like no customer's like, I want to be engaged. Like, even on like YouTube or Netflix, their goals are different than that. And so you want to sort of think about that through the lens of customer experience, which is another reason to involve design, I think. Which
is also basically talking about, I don't know if this is going to be the right definition, but customer, I would say, or basically the product outcomes, more on how the user interacts with your product, and then how that impacts also, business outcomes, right? So
yes,
if we are measuring two different things, but they're not, aligned with each other, that might be, we may maybe doing happy the customers, but at some point we don't even know if we are satisfying what the business wants. So it has to be aligned, right? So
it has to be aligned. And this is why, I mean, I talk to designers who are like, I can't get them to listen to this, like, user pain point. And it's like, well, does that matter to the business model? Like, if it doesn't, then yeah, of course you can't get them to listen to that.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. You have to navigate, see if you can frame it through the lens of the business. And if you can't, your business might be broken. I mean, it sort of depends on the level of user pain, but you got to make those ethical calls. I think we all need to take more responsibility in that as
Yes.
creators. It's to just
Yes.
be like, is this a good situation? Are we talking about a mild inconvenience or like a catastrophic, oh, this might, this could set a driver off the road if we do this the wrong way. Well, that sounds bad. Let's talk about why that's going to happen, right? Like,
So
Instacart's been dealing with that a lot. Do y'all have Instacart in Spain?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Do you know it?
No. Yeah.
It's like grocery delivery. So I mean, they've been dealing with that. So their growth team was like gaming it so that they would annoy the crap out of the shoppers to get them to take on more jobs. And that's horrible. That's not what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so you really need to be like, ooh, how do we make our product work in a way that's like not going to torture human beings?
What comes to mind is the example of Wells Fargo, the case where they're creating like fake credits or fake accounts in order to target the numbers. I mean, maybe it's the other way around, but it's I'm
absolutely
crazy.
That's absolutely the thing. Are the incentives aligned? And it's like, if you have to do something like that, like something's extremely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think that's really important. Data is so hard, and we often like micro focus on these like little data points like page views and button clicks because it's just easier, but it's important that we think about the ecosystem that those things drive.
Yeah. And again, maybe it requires to have a couple of conversations before you nail specifically the thing that you want to try. Because as you were saying, the easiest thing is to try, the click or the refresh or whatever it is. But then maybe something that is really impactful that can, help you, for example, to understand either to grow the business or whatever, that might be required, time to discover and conversations, understanding, testing, different approaches. Going back to your thing, I think that this raised a lot of controversy. But you said start small. Some people, don't agree. John, I think that John is one of them. So John is saying that.
Oh, in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to read it, that's completely fine.
Which one? The first one? One of the largest U.S. concerns.
It says, I get caught up in a mental trap on this one. I might know specifically today what I need to manage tomorrow, but if I don't capture the data today, I might not be able to measure tomorrow.
Yeah. So that's the argument that I hear most frequently. I would just say it's important to question when you instrument, like, what would I do with this information? I would argue that if you can't answer that today, and later somehow it comes up, you can instrument and gather that data, usually fairly quickly. And I think, you definitely want instrumentation. I'm not saying like don't instrument anything. You obviously should, but I just find that people, when you're at the point where you're instrumenting modal open, modal close left, like just the stupidest, tiniest details, it's just like, what are we going to do differently about this? Like, what's the key metric of the modal? Is there a key metric for that modal? Let's not instrument the modal then, right? And then if later someone's like, oh crap, we really want to know if modals are working. Well, great, we'll instrument it today. We'll have the data in 7 days or whatever. Like, if your data is good enough to act on that stuff, you'll be able to gather it pretty quickly. And so I sort of reject that argument, because it's kind of like, you can always instrument and learn it later if you decide that later it's important.
I think that the principle here is you always can add, or instrument events later, but then once you instrument it, it's very difficult that you're going to go back and say, no, I don't need this event. I'm going to remove it. That's not. And then at the same time, what's happening is the data creep that you're having on your database or whatever tool you're using. It's still growing and can create some kind of noise. That's at some extent, I believe. But I agree with that, and I took that also from your training, by the way. So I like the principle.
Thank you. Yeah, it just gets really like for example, I worked at an e-commerce company, and they had instrumented the carousel where the product appeared. And so there's like 8 photos of a tuxedo, and they instrumented the clicks through the carousel. And it's just like, obviously the first photo is going to get the most views. The second photo is going to, like, it's a self-fulfilling metric. The second photo is going to get the next. Like, what are we going to do with this? Like, what am I going to do with that information?
Right.
And it's also like, as a designer, even if no one is clicking on those photos, right? Like one person clicked through, we're still going to show them, because we still want to give people that option. It's like a customer forward thing. It already exists. Like, I'm not going to pull it off the site. So it's just like, I would have that. If you don't have an answer to that question, I would really think about not tracking that thing just yet.
So ask the question first and then instrument.
Yeah. I mean, if you have an answer for that now, then great. If you don't, I would just hold off and see where that goes.
Awesome. Dave has a question. Hi, Alex and Fede. How can we as a product designers level up our metrics and data skills? What books should we read? Tools that we should learn to have an understanding that we should have? Thanks.
Data skills. Yes. Okay. So I don't know. There's one book. I actually haven't read this book, but the head of marketing at my last company recommended it to me. It's called Data Smart. It's written by the former head of data, I think, for MailChimp. I think he's head of product there now at MailChimp. And it's about like conceptual data modeling. So that seems really good. I haven't read it again, but I that's like one book that comes to mind. Segment, the company that does sort of like data governance and data tracking, they have a really great analytics program. It's called Analytics Academy, and it's free. And it's just like lessons, and they'll send you an email newsletter every day if you want with a different lesson, but they have them all on their website. It's just Segment Analytics Academy. And that's one of the best sort of like, if I'm thinking about the product manager, engineer, design audience, which is really my most familiar crowd, that is the best resource I've seen on that stuff. It's just like very clear. How do you define what to track? How do you actually track it? How do you make sure it's tracked well? Like it's really thorough, but it's just like very accessible. So that I would highly recommend. A lot of the data tools, put out their own education. So I would recommend that, whichever tools your team are using, look at their documentation. They're good at that because it's good for them if they help train everybody. You can also, if you have a contract with one of those companies, you can lean on your account rep. So like if you're using, Segment or Amplitude or whatever, they have account reps and they can do trainings for your team. You should absolutely have them do that. I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, truthfully, most of the stuff I see out there is like either SQL courses, which is great. Like Mode has a good SQL course, also free. Most places that teach code on some level have a SQL class, like Treehouse and Codecademy and stuff like that. So, but most of the stuff I see is like either about SQL or it's about Google Analytics. And so what I feel like is mostly missing is like all the self-serve data tools, which I think are great. Mixpanel, Amplitude, Pendo. And so right now I just tell people to rely on the documentation for those tools, and then Segment's Analytics Academy, which is just awesome. But I do think there's a big learning gap there, which is why I made my class, which is targeted at this. So I have a class called Getting Started with Analytics, which is sort of about how do you set metrics, how do you do some of the instrumentation.
Which is really good. We're going to point to all the resources that you mentioned when we publish the webinar as well, so that people can access to. Great. So one more question from the chat, and then we will continue. So, hi Lex, this is from Jeremy. Thanks for your wisdom and insight. For UX, what are the known unknowns that if you had them would be a breakthrough? Wow.
I don't know what this means, the known unknowns for UX, like as a field. Jeremy, can you clarify that?
Yeah. Let me try to see if I can.
Can you unmute Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm going to unmute Jeremy.
What data if you could capture it, he's saying. Okay, so what are the known unknowns if you had it would be a breakthrough? This is like kind of difficult to answer. I think it depends on your product. Are you asking like if there's like a?
Hi Lex, it's Jeremy. It's kind of, I suppose it's more the behaviour related stuff. It's, you know, I think there are some things that can't be measured that if we could measure them would be really useful. So I suppose that's really what that question's about. Tough as it might be to answer.
This is, I think, one of the pitfalls, which is like, we can't make our whole lives about data, right? Is that what you're saying? That like, there are some things to understand about human behavior that like, just like can't be measured or like.
Well, can't be measured at the moment. Yeah, maybe it's that.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the core challenges with being a data practitioner is like, you get like really amped up on data and you can over rely on it in situations where it can be bad. I don't know. I mean, I think I think we can do a lot with our existing tools. I think the biggest gap standing in our way is just like our own mental limitations. So for example, when I worked at the Black Tux, which is a tuxedo rental, you know, and purchase business. So like if you're getting married, you can go get your tuxedo from the Black Tux. There's a website team, there's the warehouse team, there's the customer support team, there's the manufacturing side. Being able to like really get a grip on the metrics across the whole thing. It's not just about ramping up purchases or rentals. It's also about cutting costs in the warehouse. It's also about making sure that the warehouse staff and the manufacturing team is well treated. It's also about making sure that the whole company is working at a sustainable pace, that customers are getting what they need, but in a way where the team can work at a healthy, sustainable pace. Like that's a complex set of metrics. And that technically, I think we have the tools to do that, but do we have the will to do that? Do we have the will to map that out and measure that stuff? And as a designer working on the website, truly, it's hard enough for me to get people to buy suits. Like I truly didn't find enough time / maybe didn't have enough will to like go through and really think through the whole system. And I think that is what we're seeing when we talk about things that are damaging to people, even something like Facebook, which is directly damaging its users. That is what's going on there. It's like, it's really hard to do this work. It's really complex, but I do think the tools exist, and it's more about the space inside companies, the willingness of individuals, you know, how much they're held accountable by governments and regulations. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's the and I suppose the other question is, how much do you think people are guilty of leaning on their data like a drunk does on a lamppost for support, as opposed to enlighten their view?
Yeah, I mean, I think extremely. I've seen more, because of where I work, I've seen more companies like not really know how to do data at all. But yes, I think a lot of companies are over reliant on data, and at scale, you know, they're gaming that in ways that are extremely harmful. I would just add that, like, if there's something that you feel like is really important, even if it's intangible, like, you know, how happy are customers or something like that, even if that's like not really a thing that you can understand yet how to measure, it's good to be aware that that's one of your goals, and to constantly revisit and be like, do we have an idea about how we can measure this now? Or do we have an idea of how we could gather qualitative sentiment to get a sense of this, right? It doesn't all have to be numbers. Some of it can be customer interviews, customer quotes, customer feedback, like that still counts as data. So I would still define that stuff, even if you're like, we have no idea how to measure this.
That, you know, I have to say thanks to Jeremy, because it seems like he read my mind, because my next question was going to be, so what is the difference? Because we hear a lot about data-driven, data-informed, data-inspired, data, whatever, you know, other suffix you want to put there. But what I don't know, what is the right balance? I mean, of course, as we were saying, there are a lot of companies that are, you know, heavily leaning, you know, on data because, you know, the nature is data. But again, as we were saying before, Lex and Jeremy, you know, pointed out, we shouldn't forget about the qualitative information or qualitative data that we can gather specifically from customers. So what is the difference? Where, you know, should we aim to be more data driven, data inspired, data informed? What is the right balance? And I, you know, And I asked once these questions to Hidden Shaw, and he, sharply answered, you should be data informed. I say, okay, that's fine. But I just wanna know your opinion, because you might see different things, of course, throughout your career.
Yeah, I'm like sort of guilty of not being really great with terminology. I love data inspired. I've never heard that. That's amazing. I mean, the difference between data, the reason people were saying data driven for a while, and then people were like, oh, that really sounds like we're only operating off data. We should be data informed. And I think, yeah, okay. The thing that I would really love is if everyone would just like stop clinging to tools and terminology and just think like human beings and just be like, what's our goal? What's our purpose? What kind of impact do we want to have? Is the way that we're working serving that impact? So yes, I don't think you should be just like solely driven on numbers. I think that's problematic. But if you're approaching your work in a human way, where you're thinking about your fellow teammates, your employees, you're thinking about the customers, you're thinking about the greater world at large, and you're thinking about how that's all working together and how your daily work is impacting that, you won't be only working off of numbers that you collect, right? You'll be thinking about other things. You'll be talking to those people. You'll be paying attention to the news. You'll be looking for that feedback. And so that's what I would just love for everyone to do, is to just be like, it's not about design sprints. It's not about Agile. It's not about Kanban. It's about being human beings who can think critically about a problem and apply all the things in our toolkits to solve it.
Some people call that common sense, but yes, that's
yeah. But it's like it's so hard. I mean, I feel like I work with so many companies, and I look at their like it's like every day we come to work, we look at the Jira backlog, we do the thing that's at the top, and it's just like, is this so soul crushing? Like, no, is that thing still important? Does it still matter? Why is it even there? Just like questioning what you're doing, how you're doing it, like that's important. And we're sort of in this, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Spain, but if in America right now, we are in a moment where everyone's like, crap, we need to question everything we're doing in every part of our lives. And so I bring that into your work, right? Are you relying too much on data? Are you talking to customers? Are you talking to the world at large, right? Like Airbnb is a good example of a company that has just like insulated itself. It's like hosts and guests, but it's like truly, they're getting a ton of press about impacting the housing market and causing homelessness. And so it's kind of like, whoa, as an Airbnb employee, you need to go in and say, how are we looking at this and making sure that our work is not having a negative impact outside the metrics that we initially thought were relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. I like the point. Now, also, now that you mentioned Airbnb, there was an incredible interview with the CEO on the Eric Ries podcast, Out of Crisis. Just completely shocked after I hear that interview. It's fantastic. I mean, it's one of the best interviews that I've seen on a podcast, especially because Airbnb has been, hit very hard because of the COVID and these kind of things. And it's incredible how you can rebuild the whole company from, it's like you're starting over, you're starting again. But it's really inspiring to hear the CEO, how he handled the situation and all of this. So we're approaching the hour. I can't believe that, that it's almost 8 o'clock here. So Lex, I don't want to close the webinar without asking about growth, because I know that you have been working a lot of with growth. So I've been hearing also other podcasts, and they were saying now that we need to get a sustainable growth. They're not talking now about only growth; it's a sustainable growth. So how do we do that? How do we do that? By what I'm saying is, how do we look at the whole funnel and not only focusing on activation? No, we are not only focusing on acquisition, and we are only focusing on retention, but we look, I would say, at the whole funnel, just to avoid this sub-optimization that can be also painful sometimes when you're trying to bring a lot of customers, but then you don't retain them, or you have a very good product, but then you are bringing customers that are not the ones that you're supposed to be targeting. So how can we achieve, or what are the steps to try to get more sustainable growth when we're talking?
Yeah, this is really critical, and it's like not. This is why I think designers are so important to the growth conversation. And, Yeah, right now it's like it's still very metrics driven in growth. If you read newsletters and blog posts coming out from leading growth practitioners, it's like, how do I get my LTV up? And it's kind of like, you have to align the business goal, the customer goal, like that has to be aligned. And I evaluate that when I go into a company. I think, if this business grows, is it going to benefit customers, and in what way would that be true? So you have to make sure those things are aligned when you choose to lend your efforts to a company. But within that company, every feature you launch, every iteration, every change, you think about that. How does this benefit customers? How does this benefit the business? It's important to be thinking about both of those. I would also add that we've seen in the last decade, the skyrocketing growth of very harmful corporations. And it's important to also think about, if we are extremely successful, even if we're serving our customers and our business, who might we be harming? And how do we mitigate that? And there's ethics conversations happening in tech. I think those are really important to tune into. I think it's important to be questioning that work and to be looking for that feedback. So, it's not just about measuring the data. It's about questioning your bias in how you measure data. It's about talking with people inside and outside your company, including your customers and the broader world, about the impacts of what you're doing. It's about thinking critically about what you're doing every moment of every day, and working to do better every time, not just make more money. We are so far beyond that world, and it has to be about more than that. So I would encourage everyone to think about, the human impact. Is the work that you're doing elevating the human experience, and in what way is it doing that?
Right. And especially now that, our life has been completely, struck by the different COVID thing, and because now also, because of the COVID, most of the companies had to change or adapt the strategy that they were, had in mind at the beginning of the year. So, so now maybe you're seeing more companies that are still trying to retain customers rather than doing more like kind of acquisition. But at some point, when this is all over, hopefully, they will have to also again readapt the whole situation. And I think that also data in that point would be also very beneficial for them, just to try to see how do we start again. All right, now that we are back to the normal life or phase, how do we start again? Because we need to start to fit in again all the the files at the top, and then getting again back back in basis. So you think that the COVID situation is especially, I would say, it's more like an opportunity to try to also bring or change look at the things from the different point of view, and if you want to also to relate that with what you're saying at the beginning to the social impact on how data can help us too.
So a couple of things about COVID. I know we have to wrap up, huh? What time is it? Yeah. So one thing about COVID on the data side, you act on what you measure, right? So they started measuring rate of death and then countries around the world are acting on preventing deaths. They started measuring racial data. They've learned that there's huge racial disparities in COVID deaths. Some people are acting on that, some people are not. They've measured age, things like that. They're acting on that, right? Protecting the elderly, not protecting kids as much, because it turns out kids, right? So that's a really great example of you act on what you measure. And bias in measurement. What are we choosing to measure? How are we segmenting this? How are we going about measuring it? Who's measuring it? Where is it getting stored? How's it getting read out? In LA, because we have such a dramatic, astounding number of folks who are without housing, when they asked everyone to stay home, everyone was like, well, what about the tens of thousands of people on the street? They're reporting that data. It's all over the place. It's not clear who's measuring it, what the source of truth is. That makes it really difficult to act on. And it pacifies the public when this real story is not really being told. In terms of private companies, I hope that the COVID pandemic has done more than change people's lives about how they, treat their own health. And truthfully, I'm pretty sick of the how are tech workers going to work remotely thing. The question on my mind is, if you work for Amazon and your metric is to get more people to buy stuff on Amazon, how do you mitigate that with the people that you forced to come to work in the warehouse to ship that product? And they're dying. And how do you, like, is that a scenario that can work or not? Should Amazon just shut down? Should this thing just not exist? That's what I hope people are coming to terms with. I hope that people are coming to terms with that their work, you know, there's always a downside. Someone is always losing. And who is that person? Is it life or death? How are you getting involved in preventing that? And I think tech workers have a unique responsibility, because typically we're more highly paid to speak, to act, to change that, because we can't just sort of like go back to our jobs at Facebook and be like, well, I made a widget today. It looks really cool. The metrics are up, right? Like that's just not the plan anymore. Yeah. So I really hope that people are shifting their thinking, you know, evaluating what companies they're working for, who they're working for, where they're lending their efforts, and looking critically at every aspect of what we do with our daily lives.
Awesome. Great message. Thank you for that, Lex. Any before we close, any particular event, podcast, something that you want to recommend to the people of the audience to get more? We mentioned some of the resources, but any conference, any podcast, any book, anyone that comes to mind that someone wants to follow?
There have been a lot of books on tech companies and their ethics, which I think are good. I can't think of specific titles right now, but there's a bunch of them about like Uber, Facebook, Amazon. I'm speaking at SofaConf next week, which is going to be great. That's from the Clear Left team out of Brighton, but it's online. I think that will be good. I don't know. I mean, truthfully, I'm really paying close attention to social justice issues. So I'm following a lot of social organizers, like independent organizers who are working in their communities, to hear what they're thinking about, to read articles that they're sharing and books that they're sharing. Like I'm reading about incarceration and things like that. And so I think that stuff's really worthwhile, even for a tech audience, because, you know, we can't do our work if we're dead, or if other people are dead. And I think it's important that we, you know, really come to terms with the fact that we are human beings and we have to pay attention to other human beings. And so I would love to see more of that happening, because I think, you know, we've built a lot of companies without really thinking about the whole system. So yeah, I that's where my head is at right now. Yeah. Which you can see if you follow me on Twitter. Yeah. But I do have a lot of resources on the website. And if you're interested in growth, growthdesigners.co is the website that I run for growth designers, but there's a lot of great growth resources on there. I do like Letty Rashitsky's newsletter, if you know that, also about growth. It's really, you know, I think he has a PM background, so that's pretty good too. That's it.
Lex, I mean, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for dedicating this hour. Thank you for all the folks who attended the webinar. Do you want to say anything, Lex? You know, otherwise we will close. And
well, thank you for coming. I mean, I'm thrilled that so many people came. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, Fede. I appreciate it.
No, please, my pleasure. If you want to send me the resources that you mentioned through email, I'll make sure that make all that available on the YouTube video when I publish it.
Cool. That sounds good. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Lex. Stay safe. See you next time. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.